Hope and fear. Dear Beth. Guess who's coming to Jessica's house? The stork. We're finally going to have a baby shower for her next Sunday afternoon. It will be at her house, it's a surprise, so don't tell her, at 3 o'clock. She doesn't know if it's going to be a boy or a girl yet, so please bring something that will work for either. Tell your mom she's invited too. I hope to see you there. Aunt Carolyn. Beth stared at her email, not knowing quite what to think. In a way she was happy for her, since she knew that her cousin, or at least her cousin's mother, was really excited about having her first baby. All the laughter, the new things, all the adorable clothes and toys and everything else, like getting no sleep, and not being able to so much as go to the store without making a production out of it. The smile that had started to sneak its way onto her face slunk away for a moment, but couldn't be kept away for long. Sure, it would be a lot of work, but Beth found herself thinking of her own mother and how proud she was whenever the baby pictures came out. She blushed a little bit and looked back to her bed, where an old doll and a worn bear still lay wrapped up in the tousled blankets where they'd been left in the rush for school that morning, and couldn't help but wonder if her mother would be so proud of her now. She sighed softly and turned back to the computer. Maybe the baby shower would provide some sort of excuse to share what she hadn't told anyone yet, or maybe she could just enjoy the chance to be around all the baby things she so often dreamed of having herself. The latter seemed more likely, given that she had a feeling her mother wouldn't approve of her teenage daughter wearing diapers or dreaming of being 3 years old again. Still, the thought was still tempting her as she opened a new window to start shopping for the shower, but as she stared at the screen, she wasn't quite sure how to begin. Of course Jessica would need bottles, and diapers, and a stroller, and a car seat, and baby clothes. For a girl or a boy, it was a lot harder when she didn't know which, and there were a million options. Beth frowned at a thought, blushed and smiled at the same thought, and reached for the telephone. Daniel was wrestling with his key in the lock as he heard the phone ringing inside. He rolled his eyes and gritted his teeth. Come on. Come on. He could almost imagine the lock smirking at him as it gave way, and he dashed for the kitchen, catching the phone on the 4th ring. Hello. Hi Daniel. It's Beth. Suddenly the annoyance of having to rush for the phone was forgotten. Hey, I just got home, sorry, I had to walk from school. What's up? He was glad she couldn't see his face. He'd had to be more and more careful these days around her to keep her from making any better educated guesses about his feelings. Oh sorry, she paused apologetically, should I call back later? Nah, it's cool. What's going on? He quietly set down his backpack and tried not to make any noise, hunting for a soda. I just got an email from my aunt, and she's having a baby shower for my cousin. She sounded a little awkward, and he heard it clearly. Oh cool, those are always fun, he grimaced, not pleased with his lame response, but stayed quiet. Oh yeah. It sounded like she was smiling, sure enough, which was enough to bring him back up. Abruptly her voice sounded uncertain. Well, I've never been to one, but I've heard. Daniel nodded before he remembered she couldn't see him. Yeah, me either, you'll probably have a good time. What is it going to be like? He could hear her hesitate for a moment. I don't know, but I wanted to ask, she went on hurriedly. I'm supposed to bring a present, and I have no idea what to get, so I wondered if you wanted to come over and give me some feedback and help me shop for something on the internet, since I don't really know where to go in town since I've never had a baby. Daniel was fortunate his brain was quicker than his mouth and managed to bite his tongue until he could think of a satisfactory answer. Oh, sure, that's cool. I can go, but just for an hour or so. He checked the clock on the wall. It'll probably take me, I don't know, half an hour maybe? Or actually a little longer than that, so I can change clothes or something. There was a pause on the other end, probably so she could look at the time also. Okay cool, that's fine, I'll see you soon then. Thanks a bunch, I really have no clue what to look for. He couldn't help a smile, and again was glad she couldn't see him. Totally. It's okay, we'll find something. See you later. He hung up the phone and let a deep breath out. That was certainly not what he had expected, a baby shower. He didn't doubt it given Beth's extensive family, but he wasn't so sure why she'd have called him. He didn't have any younger brothers or sisters and didn't interact with children much. Leaving his backpack on a chair, he headed for his room. In his closet, a large cardboard box greeted him from the top shelf. Daniel regarded it for a few long moments. The box was closed, of course, it always was, but he knew that if anyone saw what was in it, the contents would produce more questions than answers, not the least of which was the question of why a teenage boy would have a box of diapers and toddler toys in his closet. He stared at the box. Had he left it out? No, Beth couldn't have seen it. It had been a long time since she had been to his house. Granted, they had grown up together, their parents had been friends and Daniel had no siblings his age, but as they got older they'd stopped being playmates and just been students together and mostly seen each other at school. Daniel ran his hand through his hair in thought. He could remember Beth being over at his house since he'd assembled that box. She could possibly have seen it, but unless he'd forgotten it, he would have made sure it was closed. She had been over for dinner with her family a few times. They usually came at Easter, sometimes for the 4th of July. Had she seen the box? Had it been open for some reason? He was sure he would have double-checked to make sure it was closed if company was coming, especially Beth. Maybe it was something else. Had he accidentally left it open when she was over? After only a moment's thought, he shook his head. He was more careful than that. He didn't leave diapers laying about. He picked up all the toys when he was finished playing. He made sure he did laundry when nobody was home. He didn't take anything to school except his pacifier, and he left that in his backpack. Oh, sure, he clenched his eyes shut and ran a hand over his face. That was it had to be. She must have seen the pacifier in his backpack as he was opening it to find something. But when? Where? How long ago? Obviously it was recently enough that she would think of him when she thought of shopping for baby things. He tried to remember as he took off his pants and pulled some shorts out of a drawer. What could she have been thinking when she had seen it? Surely she couldn't think that it was for him. He doubted even Beth would put that together. But he knew that she knew there weren't any babies in his house. Maybe she thought he was babysitting or something. He laced up his shoes, shaking his head. No, that made no sense. Guys didn't babysit, plus he didn't even know anybody who had little kids. He sighed again and opened his shirt drawer. Again, he was hit with absolute certainty that Beth had figured him out. The shirt on top of the stack had Winnie the Pooh on it, and the one under that, Mickey Mouse. Granted, he had gotten them both at Disneyland, but a boy his age wearing them was still not all that common. He chose a plain white shirt and made sure to grab his wallet from his pants. Maybe she guessed from the shirts. Maybe he had left the stupid pacifier in his backpack. He glanced over at his bed where a ratty stuffed frog was hidden in the corner so as to be out of sight of the doorway. It was still there though when he craned his neck to see it. Carefully he shut the closet door and made sure to tuck the frog under a blanket before heading downstairs. Beth had realized only after she hung up the phone that her room needed cleaning if she wanted to not be embarrassed to have someone see it, particularly Daniel. She shuffled the school papers into neat-looking piles. She knew she'd have to reorganize them all, but she'd have time for that after Daniel had left, put all the dirty clothes in the hamper, and ferried a total of 5 empty teacups back to the kitchen before she was done. Pulling the blankets off the bed, she paused. Oh, now what? Quickly she set aside her bear and her doll until the bed was made, then picked them up again. What should we do with you two? Her eyes darted under the bed, where she kept diapers and other things of which she was certain her parents wouldn't approve. The 2 babies looked up at her with sad, mournful eyes, and sure enough, she sighed and squeezed them both into a hug. I can't put you in there, maybe. She looked at the bed and a crazy thought crept into her head. Did she dare leave them out? Surely nobody could fault her for having 2 toys left over from her childhood, even if they weren't from her first childhood, she added self-consciously. She stroked the scratchy yarn of the doll's hair. No, surely they couldn't fault her for that. Daniel wouldn't say anything, especially considering the baby shower. Now there was a thought, maybe she could tell him they were for the baby shower, things she'd already been thinking of. But then why would she need his help, if she already had presents? No, it wouldn't work. She glanced at the bed again. Still, it wasn't that unlikely that she'd still have a stuffed animal or two. They were a lot easier to explain than some of the things hidden under the bed, especially the diapers. But then, taking a moment to close the door to the bedroom, she pulled the flat box out from under the bed. In addition to diapers were a couple of outfits, a bottle, several jars of toddler-level baby food, and a pacifier sized for an adult that she had to order on the internet and then race home for a week to make sure she got to the mail before her parents did. She checked the clock and knew she absolutely did not have time before her mother got home to do anything that involved more than the pacifier and maybe the bottle. She took them, and one of the jars of the baby food, and put them out on her desk and shoved the box heavily back under the bed. Picking up her babies, Beth put the pacifier in her mouth and lay down on the bed. Her eyes lazed shut as she suckled. Mum. She let her thoughts drift a bit. What would happen, really, if her mother found her like this, laying on her bed with a dolly and a teddy bear and sucking on a pacifier like a 3-year-old? Probably nothing. No, something, it would be something for sure. She'd probably be grounded, or something like that. Maybe she would search her room and find the diapers. Beth nodded a little. That was when she would really be in trouble, and would probably get sent to therapy or something. Naturally, her parents would take away all of her baby things and probably her computer too if they saw her browser history or bookmarks. No, she would keep her computer. They knew that she used it for schoolwork, but she certainly wouldn't get to use it for anything else. That would probably be the worst punishment she could think of, because they wouldn't dare tell anyone else about it. Or would they? No, that would be worse, if they told all of her friends or family about it, and the whole world knew about her. They wouldn't dare. She blushed, squeezing her babies tighter. They'd be too ashamed that their mature and well-behaved daughter secretly wanted to be 3 years old again. No, she'd be grounded, they'd throw out all her baby things, and that would be the end of her privacy. Well, okay, maybe not all that, but she was sure that whatever it was, it wouldn't be pleasant. Beth opened her eyes reluctantly and rubbed them a bit so she could look at the clock. Her mother would be home any minute. She put her doll and bear on the bed, headed to the kitchen to make some tea. Daniel's mind was faster than his feet as he walked through the small town. It was really only one street with a gas station on either end sandwiching a short line of shops, a church, and a library on one side, and a grocery, a liquor store, a video store and a bowling alley on the other. It wasn't much of a town and there were only 3 stores that interested him: a children's clothing store which he had never dared to go into, a drugstore he frequented to buy candy but never anything from the aisles for babies or incontinence supplies, and a toy shop he liked to smile at as he walked past but had only twice been brave enough to enter. The 3 were relatively close to each other, and even with somewhere to be he found himself lingering a bit as he passed. The clothier had an assortment of tiny sundresses up in the window along with a sign reminding shoppers that summer is coming, and though he smiled at the pastel colors he didn't stop and stare. In the window of the toy shop was a doll's kitchen and dining table complete with 6 places and a rather expansive feast. He smiled again. It looked like one family was going to eat well tonight. About 2 thoughts and 3 seconds later he started looking for a pay phone. Hello, his mother's voice came through a bit scratchily over the public phone. Hi Mom, it's Daniel. He tried to cup his hand around the mouthpiece to block some of the wind blowing over the microphone. Hi babe. What's up? Her voice was cheerful considering it was near the end of the day. You sound like you're outside. Daniel nodded, even though he knew she couldn't see him. Yeah, I'm downtown at the drugstore. He tried to think of some sort of explanation when she saved him the trouble. Oh, where are you going? She didn't sound upset, just curious. He swallowed and had to remember that he wasn't doing anything wrong. Just as quickly he frowned, wondering why it felt wrong if it wasn't. He forced himself not to dwell on it and pay attention to his mother. I was gonna go over to Beth's for an hour or two. She asked if I could help her shop for something for her cousin, I think. Daniel could hear his mother pause on the other end. Her voice sounded a bit lighter when she spoke again. To Beth's? When was the last time you went over there? He rolled his eyes and was again thankful that he couldn't be seen over the phone. It was a while ago, I don't know, she just asked me to come help her shop, that's all. There was a pause on the other end and he could almost hear his mother smiling through the phone. That sounds fun, you guys used to get together all the time. Do you see her much at school? Yes, he shrugged again, I don't have any classes with her or anything though. Oh, that's too bad, she paused a moment expecting him to respond. He didn't. Well, I suppose that's okay. When will you be home? Are you going to have dinner over there? Daniel thought he heard her smiling again and realized what she was hinting at. Oh, no, I'll be home before dinner. Just a couple hours. He had a hard time deciding whether to smile or roll his eyes at his mother's insinuation. I'm only going there to help her shop for something for her cousin, sheesh. His mother's voice lightened again and he was certain she was smiling on the other end now. Okay, have fun babe, I'll see you at home. He nodded again. Yeah, I'll be home. Thanks, see you later. He let a breath out and caught himself smiling as he replaced the phone in the cradle, checking his watch and picking up his step a bit. After a bit of thought he realized that he hadn't mentioned Beth to his mother in a long time, even though he did see her at school as often as he reasonably could without looking like he was trying to see her. Even though they'd been friends for a long time, were they still friends? Not like they used to be, certainly. Now that they were in high school he would just be another guy trying to pick up another girl, one more drop in the bucket of gossip. He sighed, walked on, and slipped one hand into his pocket to find the pacifier he had pulled from his backpack before he'd left as his mind drifted from one childhood love to another. In the kitchen, Beth sat by the front window peeking through the blinds with her pacifier in her mouth. Long ago she had mastered the art of seeing through the tiny holes where the cords went so as not to show a lifted blind to the street. It was something she developed while spending afternoons watching cartoons meant for children much younger than she was. Sometimes it took her mother a few minutes longer or shorter depending on how quickly her sister's ballet class was over. She was just starting to wonder if they would be late when the kettle started to whistle and the phone began to ring about 2 seconds apart from each other. She pulled an oven mitt over one hand and reached for the phone behind her with the other. Hero. As soon as she heard her voice she all but dropped the kettle and yanked the pacifier from her mouth, dropped it on the counter, and turned back to the kettle again to get it off the burner. It was still whistling and she had trouble hearing the caller at first. I'm sorry, who's calling please? A voice Beth recognized as one of her mother's friends came back, and she hastily took a message down. To her surprise the kettle hadn't exploded all over the kitchen during the 1-minute call. She sighed quietly and looked in the cabinet to choose a cup and saucer to get the tea brewing. With the experienced hands of 1,000 cups of practice, it was less than a minute before she was peeking through the blinds looking for her mother's car again. This time, she saw it just as she heard the front door opening. Hello. Her mother's voice came from the hallway. Beth picked up the saucer and headed out of the kitchen to meet her mother and sister, though she could already hear her sister tramping noisily back into her room. Hi, what happened? Sure enough, her mother was staring after where her sister had just gone. She didn't look too happy, so Beth was a little hesitant suddenly about asking the question she had waiting. Her mother pulled her coat off irritably. She started to answer, then shook her head, signaling that it was something she'd rather not talk about. Beth knew that usually meant that her sister was in trouble for something very foolish to her mother's thinking. Amanda had a problem at ballet. That was all she offered before turning to her other daughter with just a minor change of voice. How are you? How was school? Beth smiled tentatively, teacup in hand, obviously off to study like a good girl. She congratulated herself for her unintentionally disarming position. It was fine, nothing special. She went right on. I got an email from Aunt Carolyn today. It said that Jessica's baby shower is Sunday. Oh, is it? The good news warmed her voice a bit. We'll have to get her something. Do you want to go? Her mother had set her purse down and started toward the kitchen. Beth nodded even though her mother couldn't see her. I'd like to. Oh. There's a message on the phone for you. She swallowed and thought about plunging ahead but was stopped by her mother's voice. Okay, thanks. Hey, did you get this pacifier for Jessica? The pacifier? How could she have been so stupid? Oh. Yeah. Swiftly she set her teacup down and hurried back into the kitchen. She was too late. Her mother had picked up the pacifier and was looking at it. Beth knew her mother wasn't stupid about baby accessories. She'd already been through 2 children. I think it's too big though, she offered hurriedly. I didn't notice until after I'd bought it. Her mother chuckled, already reading the message Beth had scribbled. It sure is. That's big enough for a 3-year-old, or even somebody your size. She paused. That would be a really big baby. Though her mother's smirk wasn't hidden, Beth was grateful that her own blush was. She made sure not to let her face be seen as she scooped up the pacifier in what she hoped was a nonchalant manner. She was careful not to fall further into the obvious if accidental trap her mother had laid and said nothing more for a few seconds until she could reasonably change the subject. Oh, I thought about shopping for something for Jessica on the internet. I invited Daniel over to help me look, just for an hour or 2, is that okay? Daniel? You mean the Daniel you used to play with down the street? She was already opening cupboards and pulling out pans and utensils for cooking. Just for an hour or so, we'll just be in my room on the computer. Beth was again thankful that her mother was easily preoccupied. He said he couldn't stay for dinner. Okay, that was my next question. That's fine, it will take a while for this to bake anyway. Her mother paused just long enough for Beth to realize she hadn't meant to. Just leave your door open, okay? Ducking out quickly to hide another blush, Beth rolled her eyes. Mom, it was the anticipated response. She figured she may as well give it, just to deter her from actually getting the idea to check on them. She had a feeling she wouldn't hear the end of it if her mom found out she actually did think Daniel was cute. Scooping up her teacup, she trotted back to her bedroom and closed the door. Daniel nearly tripped over an uneven portion of sidewalk. His mind wasn't on watching where he was walking, it wasn't even on walking itself, it was flittering back and forth to the places he'd been and the place he was heading now. It had been a long time since he'd talked to Beth. Although they had grown up together, they had drifted apart when they had gotten too old to just show up at each other's houses to knock on the door and ask to play. Since he had a bit of a walk, he was perfectly happy to let his mind wander a bit. He remembered clearly the first time they'd met, the knock on his door one spring Saturday just after they'd moved in, him standing behind his mother as she opened the door to 2 little girls in swimsuits asking if they could go in the pool. Soon enough he joined them. His mother found the still-packed box of pool toys, and it was a party. He smiled. Even though he had only been in 2nd grade then, he'd had a feeling about the older of the sisters. He didn't understand it then, but he did know he wanted to play with her as often as he could. He'd had plenty of chances after that. That summer the 2 girls became his best friends. The older one did, anyway. At 3 years old the younger one was a little too young to actually play much. Beth's favorite game was house, and they played it endlessly. Amanda was too young to understand the game and the girl's mother usually found something else for her to do while the older kids played. Most of the time they were a mommy and daddy, but without any children, it sometimes became more a game of grown-ups than house. Once in a rare while, too rare for Daniel's preference, though he never said a word about it, Beth would ask if Daniel wanted to be the baby. She was always a little awkward about it and was never as good at being a mommy as his own mother was, but they were still the times he remembered best since he hadn't yet grown out of liking all the things from his babyhood. He enjoyed playing with Beth's sister Amanda too, since it was an excuse to enjoy all the toys and most of the things that he no longer had at home. Though Amanda wore diapers, he still had to be a big boy and use the potty. Another crack in the sidewalk jumped at him out of nowhere. This one also failed to trip him, but it brought his attention back somewhat to what he was doing and focused it on a single question: why did Beth call him? It seemed obvious at first. They had grown up together and she wanted a friend's advice. But why not ask her sister? Why not her best friend? Why not her mother? No, she'd called him instead. As he walked, his fingers played with the ring of the pacifier. Her mother would know her cousin better. Her friend had a baby brother, surely she would know more about babies than he would. What did she think he knew about babies anyway? Of course there was only one answer. He shook his head again. She knew about him. He remembered now. That was why she had invited him. His fingers squeezed the bulb of the pacifier hard. It made sense, but it also didn't. If she knew about him, why had she invited him in the first place? She couldn't possibly want to hang out with him if she knew. Slowly he nodded. That made sense, but suddenly there was a new and far more difficult sort of question. If she didn't know, why was she inviting him? And if she did know, why was she inviting him? Each question made the other more difficult to answer. He sighed. Why was it so hard? If she didn't know, it had to be random chance that Beth had called him. Maybe his name happened to be on the page when she opened her phone book. Maybe she saw a picture of the two of them somewhere and thought of him. Maybe she found an old email while she was looking at the one from her cousin. It had to be random coincidence. Then again, he chuckled at the absurdity of the second possibility. Supposing for a minute that she actually did know about him and invited him anyway, it would mean she wasn't scared or bothered by the idea. Shaking his head, he looked around at where he was to make sure his musings hadn't gotten him lost. No, he was still on track, aside from having gone a few houses past a turn. He backtracked, thinking again, and just couldn't believe it was true. The idea that she would actually not be disturbed, the more he thought about it, the more unlikely and the more enticing it became. What if? Beth glared at the pacifier. It sat in her hand innocently as she stared daggers at it. Stupid thing. Stupid. Never mind that she herself was the genius who had left it out in the kitchen anyway, she sighed, setting her cup on the desk and flopping down on the bed. It had been a while since she'd made a mistake that big. At least her mom seemed more inclined to think she was foolish than accuse her of using it herself and grounding her or disowning her or something. Still, it wasn't sensible to ignore so obvious a wake-up call. Reluctantly she got up from the bed and went back to the desk. Away went the bottle. Away went the jar of baby food. The evil, malevolent pacifier was dropped onto the desk. At this point it could stay out, her mother had already seen it. The only other person likely to see it was Daniel, and that didn't matter since he would probably think it was for Jessica. Beth glanced at it again. The bulb was pretty big, even someone unfamiliar with pacifiers wouldn't likely think it was meant for a newborn. Daniel was no fool. But he didn't know about her. He couldn't. She was careful. The only way he would find out was if she wanted him to know, and that certainly was not about to happen. A radical idea forcibly stomped its way into her head at that exact moment. As quickly as it did, it was chased by another much more rational idea. No, she was not about to tell him. It was a horrible idea. What if the world ended? Well, the worst that would happen is that he would think her weird and not talk to her again, but that wasn't much better than the world ending. Her hand picked up the pacifier independently of her wishes. Surely it was better to be safe and silent. She nodded with satisfaction. Surely. As he turned onto Beth's block, Daniel's attention was drawn to a somewhat yard to one side. He grinned again and stopped for a moment. On the grass, otherwise cluttered with skateboards, sports equipment, and a pair of plastic swords, was a tidy playhouse in pink and lavender, a girl's retreat amidst the chaos of a house full of brothers, and not unlike another playhouse Daniel remembered. Amanda had still been 3 years old then, just 3 years younger than her sister and Daniel on the day he remembered. They were playing house and including Amanda for the first time that day, at her mother's insistence and despite her sister's protests. The girls' parents had given them the playhouse for the previous Christmas, and tension had immediately sprung up between the sisters after the first time Amanda swept into the playhouse and purposely, so Beth claimed, knocked over Beth's tea set and dashed out again giggling. As a compromise, the playhouse had been moved outside so the girls could choose to play alone or together if they were able to get along. Amanda was just getting out of diapers and Daniel had acquiesced to Beth's request to play house with Amanda as the baby. It was the first time Mommy had had both a daddy and a baby, and though she had protested at first, Beth quickly lost herself in the role of the mommy, finding an old bottle for her baby and rocking her gently. Daniel found he enjoyed having a baby too, although he admitted he did miss the attention of having Mommy all to himself. He frowned at the thought. Was he jealous? No, not really, at least he didn't think he was. Amanda was nearly asleep by the time Daniel asked Beth for a turn to feed her. Before he got his chance though, Beth's eyes went wide and she stood up, pushing Amanda off her lap rudely. Amanda's bottom showed clearly the outline of a leaky pair of training pants, and even Beth's clothes were wet a little around her lap where her baby had leaked on her. Daniel hurried into the house to bring their mother. The girl's mother came with diaper bag in hand and ready with a scolding for Amanda for having an accident, but a smile and laughter took its place as she took in the adorable scene of a mommy upset because her baby had done nothing more than be a baby. Daniel watched with interest as she changed Amanda in front of them, whispering kind words and reassurances, cleaning her gently and soothing her, stroking her curls softly. Beth looked on silently, barely noticed by Daniel, who was intent on the maternal scene between the mother and daughter. More had happened that day, but it was the exchange between Amanda and her mother that he loved to remember. He often thought of that day as he sat at home in a diaper, holding his stuffed frog, and imagined the kindness of the same words, the same touches, the same reassurances coming from someone like Beth's mother someday. Holding the scene in his mind, he turned away from the yard and playhouse and approached his destination. Beth had put the pacifier down and checked the clock again. Daniel would be arriving any minute. She picked up her hairbrush quickly and kept her eyes on the pacifier while she gave her hair a once-over. It was best to put it away before he got there, of course. Yes, she'd remember to do that. There was no sense in ensuring he wouldn't want to talk to her after today. She did sort of like him, okay, she admitted to herself, she liked him a lot, but wasn't sure he'd understand. No, it was just better not to tell him. He always seemed a little weird after the day they played house with Amanda, then again, she wasn't surprised by that, considering what had happened. After Amanda had had her accident, her mother had changed her and asked Beth to go in and put some dry clothes on too. Beth had told her she wasn't all that wet, which was true, and her mother had looked at her for a moment, shrugged, nodded and taken Amanda back inside. As soon as she was gone, Beth asked Daniel if he wanted to keep playing house with her. He quickly agreed, until she told him how she wanted to play. This time she wanted to be the baby, just like Amanda. Daniel hesitated since he had never had to take care of a baby before, but after a moment he nodded. He took up the half-finished bottle and set Beth down on the chair in the playhouse since she was too big for him to hold on his lap. In her bedroom, Beth blushed herself at the memory and set down her hairbrush. She couldn't help wondering even now if she'd made a mistake then, after drinking the rest of the bottle, with Daniel talking to her like her mother had talked to her baby, she had done what Amanda had done. Daniel's eyes widened, but he didn't say anything as he watched a second dark spot appear on Beth's clothes, spreading quickly between her legs and through to her bottom. Without training pants, she leaked freely onto the plastic chair. Daniel was silent for a few seconds before he finally spoke. Did baby have an accident? It's okay, baby. He reached forward to pat her hair just as he had seen her mother do and tried to remember all the things she had said to Amanda. When he couldn't remember any more, he asked, "Does baby need a change?" as though it weren't perfectly obvious. Beth flushed bright red herself as she realized what she had done. She shut her eyes and listened to him say all the things her mother said, all the warm things that sounded so nice and perfect. She finally nodded a little bit, since they were playing house and she was still the baby, but when Daniel stood up to go inside to get the diaper bag, she suddenly felt afraid and told him not to tell her mother about their game. He nodded again quietly. Beth seemed more uncomfortable after that, and Daniel soon left to go home while Beth went back inside to change her clothes. Her mother didn't see her and never said anything about finding wet clothes in her hamper. Sitting in her bedroom thinking back to that day again, Beth found herself wondering what her mother must have thought, and remembered as always the way that Daniel hadn't shied away until she herself had started being nervous. She sighed again and gathered her hair into a ponytail. Had she made a mistake? She asked herself the same question often. Would things have been different if she hadn't had second thoughts? She never asked him to play house with her again, and never had an accident, purposeful or otherwise, in front of him again either. Yet if she had, how would things have turned out? The question of course led her back to the pacifier as it sat on the desk. Yes, better put it away. Who knew what could happen if he saw it? Maybe, no. Well, maybe. How would she ever find out if she didn't try? She picked up the pacifier and stared at it again. Maybe. The house stood in front of Daniel. The same walk, the same trees, the same carefully tended flower box under one window. He'd walked slower down this street than the others to have more time to think about his quandary. It was probably nothing, but the idea that Beth could have invited him purposefully wouldn't leave him alone. What if it was true? What if she did know, and wasn't afraid? Maybe she didn't invite him here to help her shop at all. Maybe she was going to confront him. Maybe she'd threatened to tell. No, she wouldn't, and who would she tell anyway? He shook his head again to try to get rid of the paranoia. Well, there was no time like the present, he thought. He'd told her he'd come, and he wasn't going to back out on that just because he was irrationally afraid of something from his childhood. The only option was onward and upward. He smiled to himself, took a breath, and walked to the door. Beth. Doorbell. Her mother's voice rang through the house. She jumped a little bit, dropping the pacifier on the desk in surprise. Coming, she called back and glanced at the mirror again. Well, her voice quieted. Here goes, do I tell him? Her reflection stared back at her without offering any help. Her smile was sheepish and she hoped she could make it look more honest by the time she got to the door. Daniel stuffed his hands in his pockets to keep them from ringing the doorbell again. He knew she would come. She'd asked him over. He just hoped he would be helping her shop, and not answering tough questions. At the thought of those tough questions he smiled somewhat to himself again. No, maybe they wouldn't be so tough after all. Maybe they would be welcome. Maybe, he had to get a hold of himself before the door opened. Hi, Beth smiled as she saw him on the porch. She felt nervous, she thought her smile looked horribly fake, she had to put a hand behind her back to keep it from fidgeting. He was adorable standing there, just as cute as she remembered him way back on the day she knocked on his front door to go swimming. Come in. Thanks, he smiled back at her. She was excited about something, it couldn't possibly be shopping for a baby shower. Something was on her mind. He mentally crossed his fingers and stepped through the door. Wow, it's been a long time since I was here. She laughed lightly. I guess so. My mom changed the whole inside of the house probably since you were here last. She glanced around the entryway feeling suddenly self-conscious. I guess we can just go in my room. He nodded readily. Okay. That's where your computer is. He winced inwardly. Obviously she wouldn't be bringing him to her room if the computer were somewhere else. Unless. Yep, this way. I mean, it's in the same place. She couldn't help a little giggle as she tried not to sound too nervous. The room, I mean. Grinning slightly, he nodded. I guessed. He quieted then, kicking himself for his sarcastic tone, and followed obediently behind her. Where is your mom and your sister? Are they here? Beth rolled her eyes even though he couldn't see them. Ah, yes, my mom wants me to leave the door open while you're here. She was quietly grateful that she had her back to him so he couldn't see her blush at the idea of needing to keep her door open with Daniel over. He managed to keep himself from laughing, and rolled his eyes in mock embarrassment. Yeah, because we're gonna make out while we shop for a baby shower. He made sure to keep the face until she turned and could see it so she could laugh at the idea too. She did. I know, she never changes. She was looking back at him as she stepped into the room. Do you have any ideas? Though he tried to keep a straight face, Daniel wasn't quite quick enough to hide his surprise at the pacifier on the desk, the one with the adult-sized bulb. That was certainly not bought for the shower. He had had to special order his from overseas since they weren't available in the United States. Oh. I dunno, he swallowed, remembered all his fears, imagined all the worst outcomes in about half a second, and plunged ahead. Did you buy that pacifier for the shower? Beth blinked. Her head turned in slow motion to the desk and the very obviously adult-sized pacifier on it. Oh, she could already feel her face starting to turn red. That one is too big, I should have gotten the smaller one. She didn't look at him for fear of him seeing through her utterly transparent lie. He nodded, smiling only a little bit and fighting down a myriad of thoughts himself. Yeah, it looks a little big. Well, let's think of something. He gracefully turned to face the computer, allowing Beth a moment to relax and collect herself before looking at her again. His mind was racing. There couldn't be any other possibility. She had to know about him. She couldn't possibly have bought that by accident, even if it had been available in a regular store. It had to have been left there on purpose. He swallowed. Did he dare call her on it? So, what are you thinking of? Carefully he kept his eyes on the computer screen. With his back to her, Beth shook her head and squeezed her eyes shut tightly. Unbelievable. It was unbelievable that she had forgotten to put it away. Now he'd seen it. She was sure he didn't believe that she'd bought it by accident. He was too polite to say anything, but she couldn't accept that he hadn't seen through her thin cover-up. Quickly she tried to decide if it would be better to go with her lie or to tell the truth. Well, honestly I don't really know. I don't know what the rest of my family and her friends are going to get for her, she sighed inwardly. It wasn't what she had wanted to say. Okay, well maybe we'll figure that they'll all get her the stuff she needs for the baby. Smart, good idea, Daniel congratulated himself. Don't show off how much you know just in case by some chance she did randomly come across the pacifier and doesn't know about you. Maybe, what does she like? Maybe something for her instead of the baby? Maybe some bath stuff, or something like that. Beth paused. Sure, that's a good idea. Here, try this first. Grateful for the distraction. What distraction? She thought, wasn't this why she had invited him? She reached over to the mouse and opened a search for bath supplies. Yeah, that's good. Some pictures came up and she chose one. Maybe a basket with soap and shampoo and bath salts. Daniel nodded, smiling. Sure, that's easy. And probably nobody else will think about it because they'll all be buying stuff for the baby. The only other thing I can think of that would go with that is a babysitter. Oh yeah, no kidding. Beth grinned a bit and clicked on some more pictures, looking through items for a basket. I bet she'd like a babysitter after the first couple of weeks. Suddenly she blinked. Hey, I could totally do that. I could offer to babysit for her for a night, what do you think? He shrugged, still with the easy encouraging smile. Sure, you could print out a certificate or something for that. He grinned a bit wider, the memory of the day in the playhouse coming back to him. Babysitting is pretty easy, I did it once. Right away she turned to him. You babysat? When was that? She asked incredulously. I don't remember you ever babysitting. Realizing suddenly that he had just brought up the very instance he had hoped she would forget, had he actually hoped that, he tried desperately to think of something to say that wouldn't bring it up. Unfortunately his wit completely failed him. She laughed. That's what I thought. Don't you remember? I babysat you once. Somehow his face stayed even. Did he just hear those words from his own mouth? Remember? Beth blushed instantly. She tried hard to pretend like she didn't immediately know exactly what he was talking about. After what she hoped was an appropriate thoughtful pause, she asked me. When did you babysit me? Daniel chuckled, hoping it would sound real and not like he was trying to steer the conversation. When we were little kids, in your playhouse. That day we played house with Amanda. He doubted seriously that she had forgotten that day. It was the last day they had ever played her favorite game, and with the embarrassing accident in front of him too. She hadn't forgotten. As often as she revisited that particular day, she remembered it with exceptional clarity. Thoughts of the baby shower were pushed from her mind by the flood of memories of one of her most favorite days. She tried to wait a few seconds and look like she had to remember. Oh, right. Oh, no. I remember that now, she giggled a little, and made sure to look up at him so he could see her blushing. That was the day I remember it now. He grinned wider and nodded. Yeah. I didn't do it very long, but I still babysat you. He thought she did look genuinely embarrassed, maybe he had hit on something after all. He wasn't sure, and the pause was noticeable. She had turned away from him by now. Yeah, lucky me, she sighed and stared at the computer screen. A few quick and decisive clicks later, the gift basket was finished and on its way. There, that's done, she looked back at him expectantly. Cool, he nodded, trying, like her, to pretend he hadn't just brought up something she was apparently very unhappy about. He sighed to himself. How was one of his favorite memories upsetting for Beth? Her smile seemed a little forced. Sorry for going all stupid, that part of that day just bugs me. She turned away for a moment since she felt her face starting to warm again as she remembered what had happened after her sister had left. It got better though. It did. Daniel sat down on the bed, all ears now. What made it better? She chuckled a hollow sort of chuckle as if something were perfectly obvious. Well, I did have fun being the baby after Mom took her out. Beth's smile was small but genuine. Her cheeks began to redden all over again. When I got to be the baby for a change it was nice, she shrugged then, looking down. But it was just a game, no big deal. I didn't mean to bring it all up again. Daniel tried to sound encouraging. Don't worry about it. I brought it up, sorry I didn't know it would make you feel bad. I thought, well, his mind was moving quickly, trying to figure out what she meant by what she had said about feeling nice playing the baby. There was the obvious answer, but it couldn't be true. The other possibility was, no, not quite as unlikely, but how could she be telling him it was okay, that being a baby was okay? It would mean she knew about him, but she couldn't. Well, he forced himself to begin again, but she spoke first. Oh, sorry. I guess you did, she smiled sheepishly and turned away so as not to let him see her rub at one eye. It's okay. I hadn't thought about that day in a long time. That was certainly not true, but it didn't matter, she realized she had already said more than she had meant to say. She didn't need to scare him away from her after everything else that had happened. Daniel watched her quietly. His guesses were starting to feel wrong. Was he right when he thought that she already knew about him? With all the things she'd said, it still sounded like she didn't. But maybe not. He didn't want to upset her more. Yet there was something else that she had said, the part about feeling nice being the baby. It's okay, sometimes being the baby is kind of nice, you get someone paying all that attention to you, after all. She looked up at him, her smile starting to come back, rubbing at her other eye. She nodded quietly. Yeah, that's a nice part, though her mind quickly and helpfully supplied several other nice parts about being a baby. She opted to stay quiet and look back at Daniel. He was listening to her. His face was open and welcoming. He had been quiet and understanding, and she couldn't quite determine the feeling, but she knew it was good. He was her friend, her playmate, her confidant, almost her brother, even after so long. But would he understand? Could he? And most importantly, would he accept her if she told him who she really was? He smiled softly at her. Even after listening to her, he couldn't be sure. He had to remind himself that it was Beth, one of his oldest friends, one that he wanted nothing more than to see happy. Even so, was hearing about him what she wanted? He couldn't be sure, but he wanted to be. He wanted her to know. He wanted for her to care and accept and be glad. Would she? He could only tell her once. After that, would everything change? Would anything change? Shutting her eyes, Beth thought back to that day, to the kind words that he had said all those years ago, to the softness he had shown when he patted her hair, to the calming and accepting way he had told her what a good girl she was. Daniel thought of how happy Beth had been, of all the games they'd played and the secrets they'd shared, all the friendship and trust they'd built, and the openness they could have now if she knew how he felt about her. She opened her eyes and looked at him, the boy down the street, the boy she always had imagined as a little girl she'd someday marry. She could barely remember a time when she didn't want to be around him. He smiled softly, remembering the childhood games, all the fun, the toys, the play, the enjoyment of having a friend he could be himself with, one who loved to take care of him as much as she enjoyed playing with him. Moments passed. They both thought, and were both afraid, and both hoped beyond hope. Then, finally, one of them spoke. "Can I tell you something?" Tricked into bedwetting. Maddie and her older sister Holly sat at the dinner table eating supper with their parents as they did every evening. As seemed usual in their home, Holly liked to dominate the conversation, telling their parents about her day at school and how well she was doing in every class. "So Mum, today in biology Mr. Hartford said I'm on track for one of the best marks he's seen on our individual coursework." "Oh, that's great, sweetie, I'm really pleased for you," replied Mum, seemingly proud of her daughter. "And can you believe it, in the childcare course they even had these massive baby dolls and they made us show that we knew how to change a nappy. I mean, why do they need to teach us how to change nappies, for God's sake? Well, you never know, love, it might come in handy one day. Maybe if you have children of your own." As Holly carried on and on, Maddie found her boastfulness increasingly annoying. She had finally had enough and just couldn't help but say something. "Jesus, do you ever stop talking about yourself, Holly? I'm fed up with you going on and on about how amazing you are at everything." "Maddie, don't be so disrespectful and rude to your sister. All she's doing is telling us about her day." "Yeah, Maddie, what the hell is wrong with you? Are you're jealous of me or something?" "That's right," Mum sighed with her. "Of course, she's too perfect to ever do anything wrong." "Stop being such an immature little brat, Maddie. For God's sake, you're acting like a baby," replied Mum angrily at her daughter's immaturity. With that, Maddie ran off up to her room in floods of tears, feeling utterly worthless and inferior at how her life was compared to her sister. Holly had always been seen by everyone as the perfect girl, regularly achieving higher grades than Maddie and having a much larger group of friends thanks to her good looks and outgoing personality. But Maddie didn't see it this way. To her, she saw Holly as boastful and full of herself, always going on about how she had done this or done that. Maddie felt fed up with living in her sister's shadow. After Maddie's little outburst, she had gone up to her room on her bed to sulk. Lying there, she felt angry at Holly's arrogant response and how Mum had even defended her. These thoughts stirred in her mind as she laid there on her bed feeling worthless and upset, and soon, despite it only being 6:30 p.m., she drifted off to sleep. She awoke a few hours later needing to pee. Looking at the clock, she was shocked to see it was now 2 a.m. and that she had slept through the whole evening. Due to it now being so late, everyone else had gone to bed. She got up and quietly made her way to the bathroom. As she walked past her sister's room, she noticed her door was slightly open and she could hear Holly was asleep. She thought about the evening's events and how much she hated her big sister when suddenly an idea popped into her head. Part of her was saying it was a mean, nasty thing to even think about doing. The other part of her remembered what had happened earlier in the evening, and how much hatred she currently felt towards Holly. She quietly went downstairs to the kitchen and got a large plastic bowl, which she then filled with warm water from the kitchen tap. Maddie then made her way back upstairs and very slowly snuck into her sister's bedroom, observing that Holly appeared to be in quite a deep sleep. She put the bowl down next to her bed and gently lifted Holly's hand, being careful not to wake her, and placed it in the warm water. She stood and waited. After about 2 minutes she was about to give up, having convinced herself it was a stupid idea that would never work, when all of a sudden she thought she could hear a faint noise. She listened closely as she began hearing a hissing sound from under the sheets which got increasingly louder. Gently lifting the duvet, her jaw dropped. She saw that Holly's pajamas were now soaking wet and her bed was soaked. She couldn't believe it, her trick had actually worked. She had somehow made big mature Holly pee her bed like a baby. Now who's acting like the baby? Not quite so perfect now, are you? Maddie thought to herself. She left the room with a massive grin on her face, not quite able to believe that she had just somehow made her 18-year-old sister have a bedwetting accident. She now couldn't wait for the morning to come around. As Holly woke up the next morning, something felt strange. As she shifted in bed, she realized something wasn't right. Around her bum felt cold and uncomfortable. As she put her hand under the covers, she realized her pajamas, underwear, and bed were all soaking wet. "What the fuck?" she said out loud to herself. She pulled back the covers and stood up. Feeling around her but and across the front of her pajamas, she felt disgusting. As she came to the realization of what had happened, that she had wet the bed. "No, I can't have. How the hell did this happen?" A frustrated and upset Holly asked herself. Examining her bed, she realized there was no hiding the massive wet patch and that she would have to quickly take her sheets and pajamas down to the washing machine if she didn't want anyone finding out. As Holly was about to do this, Mum walked into her bedroom. "Is everything all right, Holly? I heard you shouty." Mum was cut off as she noticed her daughter's soaking wet pajamas. "Oh my gosh, what happened, sweetie? You don't know, Mum. I woke up like this morning," said an obviously upset Holly. "Oh dear, it looks like you had a bit of an accident, love. Don't worry, we'll get this all cleaned up." Holly broke down in tears. Maddie woke up and could hear a commotion from her sister's room. She got up and went to her sister's room, hearing her mum's voice from inside. She barged the door open, finding Holly stood crying wearing soaking wet pajamas. Mum was trying to console her. "Oh my god, Holly, you didn't pee the bed, did you? I didn't know you were still a baby. Get the hell out of my room," scowled her angry and upset sister. "Please, can you go out of the room, Maddie, and let us sort this?" asked Mum. "Okay, Mum, I'll leave you to help the big bedwetter." "That's enough of that, Maddie. Your sister's certainly not a bedwetter. This is just a one-off thing, as she's probably just got a virus or something." Maddie felt really pleased that she had managed to humiliate her usually perfect sister as she went off to get ready for school. Holly was rather quiet come breakfast time. Maddie held herself back from sniggering, knowing Holly wasn't in the mood. The day went by without incident. Holly tried to put the accident to the back of her mind, convincing herself that it was just a freak occurrence that would soon be forgotten. Maddie, however, had got too much satisfaction from Holly's embarrassment to leave it at that. That night Maddie stayed up late, yet again sneaking into Holly's room. This time within just 30 seconds of Holly's hand being placed in the warm water, the 18-year-old began soaking her bed for the second night in a row. She couldn't believe how easily it seemed to work on her sister at her age. In the morning, again she heard talking from in her sister's room as Mum had gone in to wake her up, her oldest daughter finding her upset yet again over a wet bed. This time, instead of barging into Holly's room, she stood outside with her head against the door and listened in. "Honey, don't worry, we'll book you a doctor's appointment today to find out what's going on." "Okay Mum, but can we get this cleaned up quickly? I really don't want Maddie to find out I did this again." "Yes, okay sweetie. Can you just take your wet sheets downstairs and put them in the machine for me before you get ready?" Yeah, okay," said a blushing and upset Holly. With that, Holly quickly made her way downstairs to the utility room and put her wet stuff in the washing machine. Maddie stood back around the corner so that she couldn't be seen as she watched her pretty older sister go downstairs carrying her wet sheets, still wearing her pee-soaked pajamas which were clinging to her well-toned butt. Maddie went downstairs only a few moments later, timing it perfectly to catch Holly trying to hide the evidence of her second bedwetting accident in a row. Holly looked shocked to see Maddie. "Morning Holly. Hey, how come you're doing laundry? I've never seen you do laundry in the morning," questioned Maddie, hoping to embarrass her big sister. You. Caught off guard, Holly stuttered, not knowing what to say. "Oh my God, you didn't wet the bed again, did you?" Maddie saw her sister's face turn bright red. No, I just spilt a drink." Maddie walked up to Holly and pulled the sheets out of the washing machine. They stink of pee. "Oh my God, you actually wet the bed again. And look at your pajamas, they're soaked. That's freaking disgusting." Holly felt totally embarrassed having her little sister catch her trying to hide her the evidence of her bedwetting accident, all whilst still wearing her pee-soaked pajamas. "Maddie, just shut up and go away. Like I said, it's only because I've got a virus or something, so don't even think of telling anyone about this." "Sorry Holly, I was only joking, I didn't really mean it. I hope you get better soon." Maddie lied through her teeth, pretending to show some concern for her big sister. Inside, she was loving every second of having something like this over Holly. Mum was shocked that her usually mature daughter had suddenly now done this not just once, but 2 nights in a row. It was that last thing she had ever expected from Holly, especially now that she was a second-year college student. She feared that if it kept on happening anymore, that Holly's mattress would be ruined and may begin to smell. Maddie had made her mind up that she would do it for another night, as she was enjoying having a feeling of control over Holly for the first time in her life. It was somehow making her feel much better about herself. That night, sneaking into Holly's room at 1 a.m., seeing her sister was sound asleep, she lifted her hand into the bowl of water. Just as she placed her sister's hand in the water, Holly began moving and lifted her hand. Maddie completely froze on the spot, praying to God Holly hadn't woken up. She soon realized Holly was just moving in her sleep as she saw her roll onto her side. As Holly turned, thought her bed seemed unusually loud and kind of like it was rustling, which intrigued Maddie. Upon feeling the corner of the bed, she found that Holly was, believe it or not, sleeping on a rubber plastic sheet. She couldn't hold back a smile at this finding. Her 18-year-old college-aged sister couldn't currently be trusted to have just a normal sheet on her bed like anyone else her age. She now had a crinkly plastic sheet on her bed, something you would normally associate with small children and toddlers that couldn't yet control their bladders and were still not out of nappies. Well, you may get higher grades and be more popular than me, but I'm not the one sleeping on a mattress protector at the age of 18, Maddie thought whilst chuckling to herself. After finding out about Holly's new bed sheet, it made her more determined to make her wet her bed again. For the second time that night, she placed her older sister's hand in the bowl. Sure enough, after about a minute of Holly's hand being placed in the water, Maddie heard a trickling noise as her sister's bladder began emptying its contents, again leaving her nice and wet for when she woke up. The next morning, Maddie decided to, and Holly was sat at breakfast, now both ready for school. Maddie broke the silence. "So did you manage to stay dry last night, or did you have another accident?" "Firstly, Maddie, don't talk to me like I'm some little kid. Don't forget I'm 3 years older than you. And secondly, no, it didn't happen again. It was like Mum said, probably just a virus or something I ate, which I'm over, okay, so don't ever mention it again." "Well, I hope it doesn't happen again, Holly. Let's hope you stay dry tonight again." "Just shut up, Maddie, and stop being so fucking condescending. I'm not a kid, just 'cause you're jealous of me being better looking and more popular than you." My God, you better not even dare to mention this to anyone ever. Her sister's words had hurt her deeply. But Maddie tried to think positively. She loved this feeling of having something like this on her sister and could see just how much Holly was struggling to deal with it. She laughed in her head at the thought of the crinkly plastic sheet her big sister now had on her bed, which instantly made her feel better, imagining if only Holly's friends knew what their popular classmate now slept on. After the nasty way Holly had just spoken to her, Maddie decided it would be fair payment to keep going with the hand in warm water prank. She continued it for the next 3 nights. Each time, the gorgeous college girl had been distraught to wake up finding that she had wet the bed yet again, which she desperately tried to keep from Maddie. She had got better at hiding her accidents, which in her mind she thought she had managed to keep hidden from her younger sister. At breakfast, Maddie, knowing full well that Holly had now wet the bed 6 nights in a row, played innocent and questioned Holly. "So Holly, have you had any more nighttime accidents since the other day? Was I not clear when I told you to never mention that again, Maddie?" And the answer is no, because it was just a one-off as I was unwell, which I'm over now, so stop being such a condescending little brat. Have you got that? God, you don't need to be such a bitch about it. I was just asking. Well, don't. Stop speaking to me like I'm some kid, okay? I get it, you've always been jealous of me 'cause I'm better than you at everything, and a couple of accidents changes nothing. Wart fingers. Maddie hated when her sister called her that. Ever since she was young she'd had trouble with warts on her hands, mainly on her fingers. Holly had often used that name whenever she felt like being mean and belittling to Maddie. Her words showed her sister's true inner spite. Maddie could tell the bedwetting was really getting to Holly for her to have said this, as she was never usually this unhappy and bad-tempered. Mum was now in total disbelief that her eldest daughter had suddenly now out of nowhere managed to wet her bed 6 nights in a row. The doctor had even said there was no obvious reason for the accidents and that hopefully it would just pass. She spoke to Holly about it before she had left for college, and explained that her bedding and pajamas were being completely ruined and that her room would soon start smelling of pee, which Maddie would surely eventually notice. Holly tried to avoid the conversation as it was something she couldn't quite believe she was having to discuss with her mother at her age. After a short talk, Mum said that she would speak to her further about it later on that night. Whilst at college, Holly struggled to focus on her classes. She tried to put the inevitable embarrassing talk she would have with her mother out of her mind. She felt like some little kid that was going to be told off for wetting the bed, except she was no longer a little kid, but a mature, beautiful, and intelligent 18-year-old college student, looking to get the grades that would get her a place for next year at one of the top universities in the country. The accidents were really starting to bother her the longer they went on. A couple of her friends even asked her what was up, as they thought she hadn't been acting herself the last few days. She certainly had no intention of telling them what was up. Holly felt as if she'd literally rather die than any of them find out she had been wetting the bed. That evening, it was 10 p.m. and the family were all sat in the lounge either watching TV or sat using an iPad as they usually did of an evening. Mum disappeared upstairs, and just a couple of minutes after, Holly did as well, which Maddie thought was a little strange. Maddie decided to creep upstairs to see why they had both gone up there. Just as she was near the top of the stairs, she saw Mum come out of her bedroom and go into Holly's room. She noticed she had a bag with her. Mum hadn't seen her as the area where the stairs were was dark. Maddie then crept up to her big sister's door and listened in. "Mum, please no. I'm sorry, darling, but this is the only solution. I'm not taking no for an answer. If you put up a fight, you'll risk Maddie hearing what's going on, so I suggest you just lie back and let me get on with it." Knowing that putting up a fight would risk her sister hearing, Holly realized she had no choice and gave in. "Just lie back on the bed, love, and let me do it." "Mum, please, can't I do it? This is really embarrassing." "Surely not," Maddie thought as she excitedly listened in. She could hear a lot of rustling. "No, sweetie, because it needs to be taped on properly so it doesn't leak onto the bed." "No freaking way." Though Maddie, this comment had brought a massive grin to Maddie's face, as she knew it could now only mean one thing: nappies. Mum had clearly become fed up with Holly continuing to soak her bed and had obviously decided there was now only one solution: to put Holly back in nappies. Her usually confident, beautiful and popular college-aged sister had now been reduced to being changed for bed like a baby. All because of Maddie's cruel trick. She couldn't believe she had managed this in just 6 days. Her older sister wearing nappies would literally be beyond her wildest dreams. She imagined how devastating this would be for Holly at her age. It hadn't even crossed her mind that Mum would do this to her big sister. The plastic sheet was like all her Christmases had come at once, but Holly being back in nappies like a baby would be beyond the most amazing thing she could possibly ask for. To Maddie, this really was absolutely perfect. She couldn't have asked for a better outcome. She knew that all she needed to do now was make sure that Holly's first night in a nappy didn't end dry. Fine, just hurry up in case Maddie comes upstairs. I really don't want her finding out. After a bit more rustling and taping, it sounded like Mum had finished the job of changing her oldest daughter into her first nappy since she was 2. Okay darling, it's all taped up now. If you want to stand up and see how it feels. Holly slowly got up and began feeling her new underwear. Mum, it's so thick. I can't wear this or Maddie will notice. It's so loud when I walk. It isn't as loud as you think, love. Put your pajamas on and I bet no one could even tell you're wearing it. Holly put on her pajama pants. Pulling them up, she struggled to get them over the bulkiness of the nappy. She had to kind of stick her bum out and wriggle from side to side to get them up fully. See, there we go sweetie, it's completely hidden under those. Can't you get me something thinner to wear, Mum? Sorry sweetie, but judging by how wet your bed has been most mornings, anything thinner would risk it leaking onto the bed and ruining your bedding. I can hear it crinkling every time I move though, said a clearly upset Holly. Trust me Holly, no one will notice. It's just a temporary thing, love, I'm sure. If the problem passes, which I'm sure it will, and you stay dry for a few nights, then you can stop wearing them. Maddie couldn't help but snigger. A few nights, hey, we'll see about that. Holly, now feeling over the moon, she quickly moved off back downstairs before she was seen. There was no going back now. This whole situation was music to her ears, hearing how humiliated Holly was feeling. Normally Holly's concerns would be whether her makeup looked right or her hair was okay, but not tonight. Her only concern tonight was about whether the thick nappy she had been forced to wear to bed due to her heavy bedwetting was noticeable under her cute pajamas. After her humiliation was complete, Holly made her way across the hall and into the bathroom, feeling totally distraught and as if her life was now over. This really can't be fucking happening, she thought to herself. 18 years old, and here she was stood there having just been changed into a nappy for bed by her mum like some UN potty-trained little kid. Holly refused to accept it. She was a mature, beautiful, and intelligent girl, but deep down she knew that after the events of the last 6 nights, the truth of it was that she was actually in dire need of the extra absorbent adult-sized nappy that was now tightly strapped around her butt. So many thoughts went through her head. What would her friends think? How could she ever keep this hidden from Maddie? She couldn't even contemplate her life if she ever found out about this. As she walked, she noticed it almost felt like it made her waddle, as it was so unbelievably thick it forced her legs apart. Holly locked the bathroom door and tried to hold herself back from crying as she came to terms with her current predicament. Staring at herself in the mirror, noticing her cheeks were now glowing a deep shade of red, she started observing her butt from every angle. She could see the nappy definitely made her butt look bigger and kind of made it a weird shape. She tried hard to convince herself that if she was careful Maddie would probably not notice, and that all she needed was to stay dry for a few nights and this whole thing would soon be a thing of the past. Mustering up the courage, Holly headed out of the bathroom and back downstairs, walking slightly hesitantly as she was so conscious of the rustling nappy. She prayed to God Maddie wouldn't notice anything was up. She sat herself down in her usual spot, thankful that Maddie had continued to stare at her iPad screen and didn't appear to have noticed anything was out of the ordinary. Maddie had opted to pretend she had no idea about Holly's predicament, keeping her head down and ignoring her sister's crinkling backside as she came in and sat down on the settee. On the inside, however, was a different story. Maddie felt tonight could be a massive turning point in her life. She mentally, at this moment, felt as if she was no longer completely inferior to her sister. In her eyes, Holly was no longer the pretty, intelligent and popular girl. What she was now was no more than an 18-year-old nappy-wearing bedwetter. Holly felt utterly ashamed having to sit near her far younger sister whilst wearing the same underwear as a baby. Why the fuck did this have to happen to me? She thought to herself. The thing that worried Holly was that, God forbid this bedwetting thing didn't stop, she would have to go through this every single night, with the constant fear of her secret being found out by her younger sibling. That was one thing she really couldn't deal with, the thought of Maddie ever finding out about this. She desperately hoped that this whole problem would be no more than a short-term thing. Holly just couldn't understand how this was happening. She had never wet the bed in her life, and then out of nowhere she had now woken up to wet sheets 6 nights in a row. She convinced herself that although the doctor had said there was nothing wrong with her, that maybe she had something he hadn't picked up on, like a bladder infection which would eventually pass, and that the accidents would stop with that. Maddie thought back to the argument the other day. She couldn't believe just 6 days ago Holly was the perfect girl in every way, sleeping with all the best-looking guys at her college. Now she had been reduced to having the same bedtime routine as a baby, which involved sleeping on a plastic sheet and being changed into a disposable nappy at night by her mum. She no longer felt in any way jealous of her big sister. Holly now had a secret that would completely ruin her if anyone ever found out, and Maddie loved it. That night, lying in bed, Holly couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned for what seemed like hours, unable to ignore the bulk of the thick nappy between her legs. God, this stupid thing is so uncomfortable, she cursed to herself. Lying there thinking about her current situation, Holly started to feel upset and overcome with emotion. She felt tears well up in her eyes, and unable to hold back, she began uncontrollably crying, which made her feel even more of a baby than she was feeling already. She tried to stay as still as possible, as every movement she made reminded her of her predicament by causing either the plastic sheet to rustle or her nappy to crinkle. Eventually managing to relax, Holly fell asleep. It was midnight. Keeping herself awake, Maddie had prepared to do her cruel trick again tonight. She had debated whether she had gone too far, but then remembered Holly's cruel words. Looking at her phone, she saw it was now 1 a.m. Quietly making her way to Holly's bedroom, hearing her sister was asleep, she gently slid her big sister's hand from under the covers and placed it in the bowl of warm water. She soon heard a hissing noise which sounded louder than usual. She knew this was because it was not the sound of Holly's pee soaking her cute knickers, but the sound of Holly's pee hitting the thick padding of her new underwear, her nappy. "Oh dear, did the little baby have an accident in her nappy?" muttered Maddie, unable to hold a big grin from her face as she left Holly's bedroom and went to bed herself. In the morning, as Holly came around from her slumber, it took her a few moments to wake up enough to remember the embarrassing events of the past week. These thoughts made the 18-year-old quickly slide her hands under the duvet and check her bedsheets for any sign of wetness, which to her surprise seemed to be dry as she felt around under her butt. She thought that maybe this would signal the end of her nighttime troubles. But she then became aware of something that had slipped her half-asleep mind. Her hopes were quickly dashed as she threw back to the bulky nappy her mum had put on her last night. Putting her hands down the front of her pajamas, her hopes were soon dashed. The huge bulk between her legs was warm and squishy, meaning yet again she had peed herself in her sleep. Maddie decided that there was no going back now, so she continued the hand in hot water prank every night, ensuring her sister would wake up to a soaking wet nappy every morning. Over the coming weeks, Maddie noticed a pattern, that every night Holly and Mum would disappear upstairs at some point during the evening. On returning, Holly always seemed to stay fairly still, as if to avoid drawing any attention to herself. Some nights she didn't even bother coming back down, instead opting to stay in her room watching Netflix. Maddie could tell though that her sister had a nappy on, as it made her but look bigger, and there was a slightly noticeable crinkling whenever she moved. It made Maddie laugh that her mature sister now had this embarrassing nighttime routine. To Maddie, seeing her sister sat there knowing full well what she was wearing under her pajamas was just perfect. To Holly, the events of the past few weeks were literally her worst nightmare. She just couldn't believe she had all of a sudden developed this humiliating problem. Trying to keep it from her friends was proving extremely difficult for her. It was having a huge effect on her normally buoyant social life. After nights out, she would now always make an excuse to go home so she could avoid dealing with staying over at anyone's house. One night she actually went back to some guy's house that she'd met in a nightclub. She had sex with him before keeping herself awake and waiting for him to fall asleep, at which point she got up and left. She certainly didn't want to deal with the embarrassment of wetting his bed and him telling all his mates about it, and there was no way she was going to carry around a nappy in her handbag in case she stayed at someone's house. One night Maddie went into Holly's room to do the hot water prank. She was a little later this time. She wanted to see it with her own eyes that she had actually reduced her college-aged big sister to wearing a nappy to bed every night, so she decided to gently pull back the covers to GE. Holly was on her side and Maddie could see the nappy peeking out of her pajamas, which made her smile. She gently slipped her hand down the back of her pajamas, feeling the nappy. She couldn't believe just how thick it was. Mum had clearly taken no chances when choosing Holly's new bedtime underwear. She obviously had little faith in her 18-year-old daughter's ability to keep her bed dry, with good reason. She then noticed something that surprised her. The further she reached towards the bottom, it seemed to get more warm, and felt kind of mushy. She realized this meant Holly had already wet her nappy, without her hand being placed in warm water. She suddenly thought, had she over the course of the last few weeks trained Holly into becoming a bedwetter? Had she trained her older sister's body to pee in her sleep by making her wet herself so many times? Over the course of the next week she only did the prank once. What she did instead was go in and check Holly's nappy every night at 3 a.m. She found that on 6 out of the 7 nights Holly had already used her nappy, and on the night she was dry at 3 a.m. that was the one night that Maddie did the prank. She couldn't believe it. She had somehow managed to turn her perfect older sister into a chronic bedwetter that was now totally reliant on wearing a thick adult nappy to bed to prevent her soaking her sheets. This realization brought great pleasure to Maddie, knowing it wasn't now the prank that was making Holly wet the bed each night. She no longer needed that. Her big sister was now an actual bedwetter. Maddie loved the thought that because of her cruel trick Holly was likely no closer to being out of nappies at night than a baby. In fact, a baby or toddler would probably have a better chance of keeping its bed dry. Holly was totally fed up. She had endured the embarrassment of having tests done and seeing countless specialists. All she was told was that there was nothing wrong physically and they don't know what's causing it. All she knew was that she kept having this same weird dream. A flashback to last night. Holly was sound asleep in bed. It was like she was floating. She felt totally at ease drifting around in endless crystal clear, beautifully calm ocean water. As time passed, she slowly started to fall below the surface, the lovely warmth of the water engulfing her as she gently submerged. The heat from the water felt extremely relaxing as she let her body follow the natural current of the water. A gentle voice repeated the word, "Relax, relax." She could then see what looked like a toilet in the distance, but before even attempting to get there she felt any tension in her body disappear as she lied in the comfortable warmth of the ocean. Eventually she began to rise back to the surface of the water where she began feeling a little colder. Still asleep, Holly hadn't so much as stirred. What the beautiful college girl had done, however, during her relaxed state was empty her bladder into her now rather swollen and warm nappy. One evening Mum and Dad had gone out to eat. Maddie had observed that Mum had gone upstairs with Holly just before they left at 7:30, which she could only assume meant one thing, changing time. Meaning Holly would be spending a lot longer than usual in her nappy, and unusually the girls would be left on their own. Holly had protested about being changed at such an early time in the evening, but Mum had given her no option, stating that they would be back very late and that she would likely be in bed by then. Maddie had decided to invite a friend, Tara, over for the evening. Tara arrived shortly after Mum and Dad had left. Holly hadn't seemed all that pleased to have someone else in the house, which to Maddie was understandable when she was 3 years younger than Holly, and yet Holly was the one who was hiding a nappy under her pajamas. Everyone was sat in the lounge. Between the three of them they tried to pick a film to watch. Maddie and Tara wanted to watch The Hangover and Holly wanted to watch Anchorman 2. Maddie announced that it was 2 against 1, grabbing the remote she put on The Hangover, which Holly wasn't very pleased about. That's not fair. Yeah it is, that's how it works. Shut up Maddie, that's just immature, snapped Holly. What Maddie felt like saying in response was, I'll tell you what's immature Holly, being 18 years old and still having to wear nappies 'cause you can't stop pissing the bed, but she thought better of it. It took all of her might to hold herself back from outing her sister as a bedwetter right there in front of her friend. They settled down and watched the film. Towards the end of the film, Maddie noticed Holly holding her stomach on and off. She wondered if she might soon need to use the bathroom. As soon as the film ended, Maddie went upstairs, took her pajamas and went into the bathroom, knowing if Holly needed the bathroom she would have to wait until she came out. Taking her time, she got undressed and proceeded to have a nice long shower. Not long after she had gone in the bathroom, Holly started banging on the door. Maddie, will you please hurry up? I really need to use the toilet. I'll just be a few minutes, I'm taking a quick shower. For God's sake, just hurry up. Maddie could hear the desperation in her sister's voice, but continued to enjoy her nice hot shower. By now Tara had heard what was going on and she was now stood watching Holly, smiling at the older girl's struggle. She discreetly got her phone out and recorded Holly's struggle. Maddie took her time. She washed her hair twice and then conditioned it, not in any rush, as she wondered if Holly would save herself from embarrassment and hold on. Holly kept banging on the door whilst jumping about, trying not to humiliate herself. Eventually Maddie had finished. She got herself into her pajamas before finally opening the door. As she opened the door, it looked as if it might be too late for Holly. She was bent forward with one hand clutching her stomach and the other hand holding her butt. Tara noticed something weird sticking out of her pajamas as she bent forward. Running up to her, she tugged at her pajama pants, pulling them down around her ankles, leaving her stunned. Oh my God, she's wearing a fucking nappy. Holly, too preoccupied to stop Tara exposing her, then lifted her head as she let out a big gasp as both girls stood watching in complete shock as the 18-year-old uncontrollably lost control of her bowels and began messing her exposed nappy right before their eyes. The girls were both totally stunned at what they had just seen, and the best part of all was that they had the whole thing recorded. Holly ran off crying into her bedroom with her massive sagging nappy still on full display as she slammed her door behind her. Tara and Maddie just looked at each other and burst into fits of laughter. Boy, were they going to have some fun with this. A short while later they went up to Holly's door. Oh Holly, can we come in and have a little chat with you?